Thank you all so much for a really stimulating day and a half. I just have a few kind of observations in closing, but I just, of course we saw a lot of recurring themes come out of our conversations, a lot of challenges in the work that we're trying to do, challenges of scale, challenges of chronological resolution, trying to compare and bring into dialogue really diverse data sets, really diverse landscapes. And I think, we've recounted a few times the need for kind of the next generation of Horton and Purcell, which I think each of us in our own way are, striving to work towards. And we've called for repeatedly a need for good local data sets and an increase in high quality archaeological and environmental research. And I'm really energized looking to the future in that I feel like we really are just scraping the surface of what's possible with these kinds of approaches and methodologies, these kinds of research questions. And of course, as we've already talked about it a little bit, I'm hyper aware of the modern ecological crises and our own role in this. And, there's a lot of kind of more political publications in the realm of archaeology calling for historians and archaeologists to really rise to this occasion and start telling these big narratives and bring our work into the popular audience and more. And I think as we spoke about just a few minutes ago, the differences between our current situation and these very foreign, diverse societies that we study are, of course, incredibly important to acknowledge the differences in scale with the challenges that we face. But I do think our conversations the last few days, at least for me anyway, as I've struggled with this question myself, what's the relevance of what I do? Why am I wasting my time studying the Romans when the world is burning? And so, one of the things that I think Ruben and I were both hoping to get out of this conference is some more reflection on what we can do. I mean, there's a lot we can't do, admittedly. There are a lot of limitations in our data sets, limitations in the comparative aspect. But so a few things as I was laying in bed early this morning kind of came to mind. So cities as a driving force of environmental change and the movement of resources across the landscape, that's a theme that came through in I think a lot of the papers at this conference. And of course, we live in a very urbanized world and a world that is becoming increasingly urbanized, especially as we look to the future and the stress of climate change making huge swaths of the world less hospitable for habitation. I mean, I think taking this city-state approach and asking these questions do offer fruitful parallels for looking at an urbanized world now and in the future, and what cities do to the environment and how they change kind of ecological dynamics. Second, in a very globalized world like the one that we live in, one of the themes that really came out to me was these mechanisms for localized resilience. And this came through in a few of the papers, but the reliance on local production and the importance of regional buffer systems to help respond to localized periods of stress. This is something that's also being called for in, kind of the sustainability world, the need to, balance or even shift away from our globalized markets and really focus more on localized production that can be more sustainable and resilient and to face the challenges ahead. A third theme that came out to me are issues of perceptions of the environment and the organization of knowledge. I think Hans really kind of set the tone for that in a really nice way. And of course, when we're dealing with this, the organization of knowledge and perceptions of the environment, we're very often dealing with issues of religion in the ancient world. So again, in a lot of ways, seemingly very foreign from modern societies, but I think there's still a lot of really valuable parallels there, even in the modern world. How is knowledge accepted and disseminated? And even if, let's say, the kind of religious connotation is much different and the scientific knowledge is much different, as we see in a lot of politics, there's not a one standard narrative of agreed upon knowledge, and nor is it disseminated to a wider populace. So I think that's another issue that can be really potentially useful for our modern explorations. And then lastly, I would just observe that, even with big problems and these big, very complex systems, one thing that was kind of brought up to me in our conversations is really the role of the individual in contributing to larger community resilience, whether that's the salt maker, the shepherd, the farmer, but how individual choices on the ground do have kind of these scaled up, have kind of these reverberating effects on the resiliency of a community. So the individual choices that are made and the knowledge available to individuals, again, going back to the point I just made, can have these reverberating impacts on a community's ability to be resilient. And then kind of contrasting that with the role of the state. And I mean, this is something that, moving forward, I think a lot of sustainability minds have to really grapple with, is the role of the individual and the role of the state, and how these things can work in conjunction. So in closing, I just wanted to observe that this is the first meeting of the first in-person conference for the Center of Ancient Environmental Studies, and we don't intend to do this very often. Really, we've talked about building a global network of scholars working on these issues and asking similar research questions, but also hyper aware that meetings like this do have a pretty sizable carbon footprint. And so what we wanted to do with this meeting is really accomplish a lot. And I personally feel like we have, in personal connections, coming together after a pandemic where so many of us really couldn't meet in person. I mean, this has been rejuvenating personally in a lot of ways to just kind of get back to what normal life is. And so I think really a very critical meeting. And we will have other opportunities to invite you out, hopefully to St. Andrews, and have other opportunities to meet. But we do hope to pursue a model of hybrid and remote activities as much as possible to continue the dialogue and have it be a very wide dialogue, but also with a minimal carbon footprint. And I think as academics, as hard as these COVID adaptations have been, and as limiting as it is to our kind of social interaction and our own intellectual growth, at the end of the day, we have to appreciate our own ecological impacts. And so this is something that we're still experimenting with. And of course, doesn't always go according to plan to have this remote and hybrid aspect, but I do so appreciate your patience and understanding, as this was really an experiment for us. So this was funded by the Royal Society of Edinburgh. We received an Arts and Humanities Research Grant. This was like a year and a half ago, and this has actually been our first opportunity to spend some of that money. So we are grateful to the RSE, the Scottish Government, for supporting this kind of environmental work. And it is something that Scotland and St. Andrews in general are really trying to take a lead on. So again, just to thank you all for your really stimulating contributions, for traveling here to engage in this discourse with us, and thank you to our two respondents who gave much more thoughtful comments yesterday, so much appreciated there. And lastly, we're very grateful to you, Mary, for all of the help that you provided remotely, and also to the Classic staff, Fiona and Sam as well, for helping to organize all of this. Despite all of the bumps in the road today, they've been tremendously helpful. So safe travels, and I really look forward to continuing the conversation with each of you.